Just amazing watching all of you popping up on my screen. I'm Wendy Hirsh, and I'd just like to welcome you on behalf of NICEC to this seminar on career development work in organisations. A lot of you are fellows and members and will know NICEC well. Particular greetings to several of our international fellows who are joining us from different time zones. Lovely to have you with us today. And welcome our many guests who may know NICEC less well, including quite a few students. Do check us out on www.nicec.org and look at becoming a member of NICEC, a fabulously stimulating and inclusive network. We've got an action-packed programme for you in this seminar. I'm going to speak first on drivers, trends and challenges of career development in employing organisations. Then we'll have Rosemary McLean, Director of the Career Innovation Company, and Joe Edwards from Burberry, talking to us about implementing a strategic approach to career development. Then you're going to get a good chat. And then we're going to, our third input is from Rob Nathan and Gilly Freedman from CCS, Career Counselling Services, on developing and sustaining the capability for effective career development in organisations. We'll finish at about 6:30 after some questions, and there's an option to carry on a little bit longer if there's some who have a question they didn't have a chance to ask or want to talk a bit more. I'd also like to thank Michael Labalestier, who's on Zoom control, who's a NICEC fellow and a real asset in these Zoom days. Michael, did you say what you wanted to about Zoom, or is there a bit more to add?
I think just to add that we are recording this session. So if you don't want your camera to be captured, please switch your camera off. And please do stay on mute when you're not speaking. Later on, there'll be a chance to join in breakout sessions when you all can come off mute and you can share your camera. Throughout the session, do use the chat. So make your comments there and do respond to each other there in the chat. And we hope that you enjoy the session and make lots of good connections this evening.
Thanks, Michael. Right, so I'm going to be covering the drivers, trends and challenges of career development in employing organisations. I'll be talking about some of the things about doing career development work inside an employing organisation that's perhaps a bit different from doing career guidance work in other settings. I'll be trying to look at why employers might be interested in career development, what's in it for them. I want to say something about the messages that employees hear about careers, a bit about practices, what employers are really doing, and then finish with some challenges. And I'd like to thank quite a few people who are here today who've been sharing ideas with me through the summer, really, because of other work I've been doing, just to review where on earth we've got to with career development in employing organisations. And you know, how, if at all, the field is moving forward. I would like to say that in the other two sessions, you're going to get some lovely insights into real sort of leading edge practice. So I thought my job was perhaps not to show you what the most innovative and progressive employers are doing, but a broader picture of what many employers are doing. Because I think we can delude ourselves if we only look at the gorgeous things that people like Rosemary and Rob do on a daily basis. Do put any questions in the chat and we'll come back to them later. So careers in organisations, you will all have your own definition of career development. For me, as I suspect for you, it's about the series of work experiences someone has over time, the transitions between them. And in organisations in particular, it's about how employers facilitate those careers and the associated learning that careers involve. I've spent a lot of my adult life interviewing employees about careers. And for them, of course, that has multiple meanings too. For many, it's about a sense of growth or progress towards something they want to do, or to be, or to feel about their work. Also, some sort of sense of direction and some way of thinking about their working future. So this idea that, oh, most employees aren't interested in careers, I really profoundly believe is rubbish. They may not immediately connect with the word, but that sense of being able to think about your future work and not feel frightened about it, I think is very important, particularly now. Why am I interested in careers inside organisations? It baffles me and some of our other speakers, I think, how little organisational career development appears in career theory and even in NICEC conversations. We sit through endless hours talking about public policy on career guidance and spend really very little time on where most careers take place. Just to give you a feel, in the UK, even in this dreadful year, 75% of all 16 to 64-year-olds are at work. 86% of them are employees, not self-employed. Even if you take off all the precariat and the gig workers, you're left with something like 80% of everyone who works in a fairly ordinary permanent job. That includes part-time workers, who I do see as perfectly ordinary, but they are permanent, they have contractual hours. That's nearly 28 million of them. Now, I'm a mathematician by background, and I think that's shed loads. You know, the technical term for the non-native English speakers here is, you know, really a lot of people are in ordinary, permanent employment with all sorts of different employers. The other myth, there are many, of course, is that everyone's moving around all the time. Recent ONS data shows about 90% of people stay in the same job each year, goes up and down with the economy a bit. But about half of those who move job within the firm they work for. And obviously that's firms of all sizes in that data. So it's always seemed to me that work in employing organisations is incredibly important. It's where most people are trying to make sense of their working lives. I want to say just a few things about the ways in which careers work in organisations is a little different. I've picked out three, really. One, which is blindingly obvious, is that you've got an employer and many agents of that employer and different people, and you've got an employee. So whatever you do has to make sense to both parties. You have to look for a win-win. And yet I still hear a lot of discourse around, whereas, you know, occasionally one gets the feeling that some careers people almost regard the employer as the enemy. You know, it takes two to tango in the workplace. And Rosemary, I know, will be saying a lot more about that. And career development is a really important part.
I can't hear any sound on this at the moment, so this is pretty hopeless.
Sorry, have we got a problem? I heard someone else's voice just then. No? Oh?
You've gone silent, Wendy.
Oh, I've gone silent. Am I non-silent now? Right. Was I silent the whole time, or did it just go?
Yes. No, sorry. I just muted everyone because we had some background noise.
Oh, right. I got muted by mistake. Okay, back to the plot then. So the employer and employee are both there. The second important issue is that career development inside a company is still about individual career planning and career decision making, but it's also very much more about the complex process of getting career action from the individual's point of view. And that action is governed by many processes in organizations, even in small ones, that are not mostly career processes. They're the processes of how jobs are designed, how jobs are filled, how training takes place, how you talk to your manager or you don't talk to your manager. It's cultural and political as well as procedural. And very little of that will be seen by an employer as something to do with careers. But those are the processes we have to work with. Career guidance is a term you really never hear inside an employing organisation at all. So careers work inside organizations is not guidance in that sense, although of course what you would call guidance is very much part of the picture, but that's not the language. The third thing I want to pull out is that the ideas that affect careers work in organizations do not come from the field of career guidance or counselling. They come from the fields of business, leadership, management, and very much of human resource management, of the HR profession, which in our crazy UK world is a completely separate profession from the profession of career guidance. And in fact, I almost never meet a career guidance professional in a workplace. Some of the people in the room today, though, are people who span that. So when we look for big ideas, looking at textbooks of career theory is not where they come from. Okay, I'm going to move on then to the drivers of careers work, and I want to outline just a few. I think the biggest reason why employers are interested in career development usually boils down to skills. It boils down to the fact that there are some skills they can't easily recruit, and it's easier to get them by growing them, not through formal training usually, but through the sequence of work experiences that people have. I will also make myself unpopular. I can almost hear you snorting, even though you're muted, by saying that for me, the development of talent management over the last 20 years has in the end helped career development. I don't think it did at the beginning, but it's got the word careers back on the agenda. It's got the word potential back on the agenda. Also, that idea of talent pipelines, of people coming through, whether vertically or in other ways, to resource work has filtered out. And it's now why employers work with schools and universities. So it's not just about people at the top. So skills is a big driver. We then have attract, retain and motivate, which always come out as a sort of bundle and demand a lot of unpicking. But most of them are two-edged. Yes, you know, a good career conversation might retain people, but a really good career conversation can also lose someone. And we know that that's something employers think about a lot. Employee engagement, another great HR fashion of the last 15 years or so, has also filtered into a view that actually you do have to care about how your employees feel. And you sometimes ask them how they feel. And that, I think, has probably helped careers work, because those surveys have often been a pressure on employers to notice what tends to be rather disappointed feedback they get when they ask questions about careers. The third big driver is change. And we're hearing a lot about flexibility, adaptability, resilience. All sorts of issues there, but I do think particularly this year that change will take us back to skills, and a lot of interest coming up in upskilling, in reskilling, also in redeploying internally as well as externally. The final one I just want to mention very briefly is inclusion. Inclusion is a kind of slow burn time bomb on careers. It's got beyond business cases now. It's a reputational issue for employers. And again, particularly in some sectors more than others, the pressure to be inclusive, not just in recruitment, but in development, I think is really helping us with career development. The thing that has helped less, I think, is that employees still hear very negative messages about careers, not necessarily just from their employers, but from the sort of public chat. You know, there are no careers, there are no career paths, we all change our jobs X times. A lot of myths. And interestingly, it's not really what employers believe. A very recent survey has shown that the majority of employers think that careers is a partnership. They don't always say that very clearly to their employees. I noticed that way back in 2003, just as many said it was a partnership. But the communication to employees of this is me and you, and this is how I help you with your career, is still very unclear. And I think a lot of employees still hear the messages about the self-managed career as a very negative message. In terms of practices, then, a very small number of practices are very widely used. The big ones are an open job market, where jobs get advertised and you apply for them, conversations with the line manager, both formal and informal. And what we know about that is even amongst big employers, only a minority train all their line managers. That's something Rob Nathan and Gilly will be talking about later. Succession planning for senior jobs is still very common. And some sort of career information and resources is also very common. Sometimes glorious, often quite unimaginative. The things that are much less widely used are some of the things we're going to hear about later. Career workshops and courses. They are known about by employers, but they seem to come and go. Career coaching and counselling, commonly provided to very senior or special people, but not commonly to the majority of the workforce. And Rob will help us understand the many ways that some kind of career coaching can be delivered. And the other thing that is not widely used are developmental experiences for employees, where they get to try something that they don't already know how to do. Again, we do that for our fast track people and our senior people and our trainees, our apprentices, our graduates sometimes, but not for just ordinary employees. There's a lot of interest in technology at the moment, and new generations of incredibly complicated tools are being developed, and we may come back to those later. I just want to end with a few challenges so that I keep us on track with time. We've looked a bit at the characteristics, at the drivers, at the practices, which are mostly what someone laughingly called light touch to me recently. They're very light touch, in fact. The real challenges are the messaging, which I touched on, the fact we're still leaning on the line manager to deliver most of this when that's largely failed for at least 20 years. That we're not giving people very much access to developmental work tasks. So you're into a catch-22 where the open job market inside a business will let you get a job that you've fully done before, but not a job that requires you to do some things you haven't done before. I think that's a huge issue, as it is in career guidance in other settings. How you let people show that they can do something through experience. The challenge I want to finish with is that it's no one's job. Actually, it is, it's Joe's job, and we're going to hear from Joe in a minute. But very few people have a job in HR to do career development. And it doesn't sit comfortably in HR. It has to cross between learning and resourcing, and those are in very separate boxes usually, even in a middle-sized HR function. I think if we made career development someone's proper job, we'd be in a much better place. Right, that's been a rather whistle-stop tour. I think I'd better leave questions, and I'll read the chat and we'll come back to them later. I'm keen not to take up Rosemary's precious slot. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Rosemary and Joe. Rosemary has done all these things. She's been a careers officer, an occupational psychologist, is also a member of CIPD, has worked in outplacement, and is one of those people who does bridge the world of HR and the world of careers. And we're very grateful that Rosemary is joined by Joe Edwards, Talent and Career Development Manager for Burberry, one of the rare people with Career Development Manager in her job title. So over to you, Rosemary.
Hi, thanks Wendy. Thanks for that introduction, and hello everyone. I know a lot of people on the call, but obviously great to meet new people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you how I approach careers work in organisations. I've been doing this for quite a long time, within the Career Innovation Company, and I'm going to provide some visibility of some of the methodology I use as a practitioner and the sort of activities that have impact. So it's going to really build on what Wendy's been talking about. And here are some of the organisations I've been working with, and some of them are here on the call, as you know Joe is, but there's also Sarah's here with Coty, I know. And I think we will hear from Jo very shortly, which I think she'll bring it to life a lot more. And I think one of the things I like to say is the way we position and advocate for work with organisations, it's all about organisational success. It sounds a bit rhetorical. It's very much about the careers of people. And I think Wendy's really put that across. It's their capabilities, their experiences, their motivation, their engagement that really makes an organisation. So I was really pleased to hear what Wendy was talking about, that we don't focus enough attention on this. But very much in my work, I'm trying to bring the employee lens to the table in organisations. And last year we did some research on Careers of Tomorrow, which was looking at some of the trends that Wendy has been talking about. And I think with COVID, we're just seeing this really accelerate. And these are the drivers that I'm seeing all the time. And very often the first thing an organisation will say when they talk to me about this is that, we don't quite know how to do this. There's a lot of things we want to try and tackle. And one of the main things they often come up with is this idea of how can they re-educate the way people think about careers and really bring employees with them. So I think it is that partnership. But as Wendy said, many organisations tend to focus a little bit on talent management. And talent management, I do think still sounds a little bit like it's from the organisational perspective, because people talk about talent management. Individuals talk about managing their talent, do they? So I think it is very much focused on the capabilities, the skills, which are really important. But the perspective that we try and bring to this is actually, all the things we all know as practitioners about careers. It's about, people interested in their future, people thinking about their concerns, financial, all of that is what the individual brings to the table. So in my work, I'm trying to somehow find a way of bringing these two things together. And one of the ways that this happens is, as Wendy was talking about, is through conversations. And I think when Rob talks later about this, how can you build the capability around conversations? That's a really important aspect of it. And that could be via managers, mentors, and so on, as we've already talked about. But one of the things I want to now move on to is talk about how organisations could have much more of an intentional approach to how they think about the careers in their organisations. And this model is something we use practically. We use it in workshops with senior stakeholders, we use it with HR, we use it with managers, and it just gives a bit of a sense of what the work is. And I think the first thing I would say is that careers are complex. They're part of a wider system. And if organisations want to have impact, they have to address cultural issues as well. This is one way of doing it. It can be quite tricky, I think, at times to decide where to put attention. Often employers are tempted to just jump into the career enablers, the tools that help individuals, but it's really only one part of the jigsaw. It's the wider picture. So I'm just going to say a little bit about what this model means in practice. So on the left-hand side, which is the sort of more structural factors that impact on careers in organisations, you've got the career framework part. And, employees do want to know, what sort of a career journey can I have? People like to plan, they like to think about it. And as Wendy said, people do move around their organisations a lot. But how do you describe that to people in a way that's meaningful? And how do you do it in a way that people can plan and understand the capabilities they need to get? So in this career framework box, often we're helping organisations think about, well, how can we describe that without it being like a detailed, every single job? One way of doing that is we lift it up a level to creating a career model, which is really a way of describing the types of career tracks people can follow, like generalist or specialist or individual contributor, and then how that maps within different job families or functions. So that's some work that we would co-create. The other work we might do there is with job families to try and get a one-pager which describes some of the key experiences and capabilities that people can work towards. So it makes it really tangible, but not too fixed, because of course roles will change all the time. So it's more headline, more broadly, how can I orientate myself and make these potential moves? And very often a good way of bringing that to life is through stories of the sorts of ways people have navigated their way through. So that's a bit about the career framework part, and that's quite complex work. Then there's the career proposition, which I think is really what Wendy was talking about. And that's so important because it's where the business can put across that partnership idea. What is it they're saying about careers that people can have? What does it look like? How can they create a realistic and authentic picture of what that looks like? So often to underpin that, we'll spend time working with organizations thinking about the beliefs, the principles that really drive that proposition and how it's changing. Well, diverse talent would be a good example. We see everyone as having potential, everyone has talent, and putting those messages out. So that's a big part of the work, and that often links to comms, big campaigns to change the mindset about that. And a big part of that is where I think organizations are trying to re-educate people about what a career can mean and managing expectations. And then there's the bottom bit, which is around the alignment, which Wendy talked about, is all the things that impact on careers, which are nothing necessarily overtly to do with careers, like recruitment and job moves and policies on pay. All of that affects careers. And as HR don't always join these things up. So another piece there we work on is how to do that. So the strategic piece is really important, and often we'll do that by getting people together and working it through and making decisions and trying to then turn that into a plan of action. The other side's maybe a bit more familiar territory for us in the careers world, because there's the whole thing around career conversations, which does make a big difference, and equipping not only managers and mentors to have conversations, but individuals as well, how they can approach career conversations. There's that experience-based learning that Wendy talked about as well. How do people get the experiences? What can you do to support that? People shadowing in other areas and so on, and building that in. And then the career enablers, which is, very familiar territory. That's what can you do for individuals to help them with their career journeys. We've done a lot of work in this area, and one of the things that's helpful we found with structuring coaching workshops, we have an online course called Be Bold, where we underpin that with some of these meta competencies around how do you navigate careers in these complex situations. So we've got these 7 meta competencies, if you like, that we embed within all of our programs that really, really help and bring visibility to it. So it is complex. I think it's really interesting work, particularly if you can come at it from a strategic and organizational perspective, but it's also really powerful to help individuals navigate this. And you're going to hear from Jo now, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how Burberry has really brought this to light. I've just got some references there from some of the things I've talked about. So Jo, are you ready to roll, as they say?
Thank you, Rosemary. And just to introduce myself, as Wendy introduced me earlier, my name is Jo Edwards, and I work in the talent management function at Burberry as the Global Talent and Career Development Manager. So just thinking about what that means. So I'm responsible for driving the career development agenda across Burberry, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So giving an overview of where we've been on our career development journey at Burberry, but also where we are now, some of those challenges that we faced, and just showing how we've progressed. But I also, as part of my remit, I also look after the end-to-end performance management cycle. So thinking about objective setting and also the year-end performance management review piece as well. And on top of that, I know there's been a lot of mentions around talent management. So that's a new part of my remit, is thinking about talent management and the development management approach. So I did actually join Burberry purely as a career development manager, but my role has evolved over the past few years as well. So just moving on to the next slide. Thank you. So as I mentioned, what I want to do just over the next 10 minutes or so is just to share an overview about the career development journey at Burberry, and just also to understand why is career development important to us. And it all goes back to 2017, and we have been on quite a journey over the past few years, but it does go back to 2017 when we conducted an engagement survey for all employees, and employees told us, and it was a very clear message, that they needed more support around their own career development, but also support for the people that they manage. So there was a lot of feedback and a lot of key themes, and that was a really big driver for us. It really made us think about career development and what we wanted to be able to do next. And just also the fact that we're very much aware that career development is fundamental for our success. It does link in with performance, productivity, motivation, and we are a global organisation. We have more than 10,000 people. So it's really important to be able to make sure that every single person at the company feels engaged, to make sure that they feel motivated. We want them to feel that they are being developed, but also just to really think about taking that next step. We want people to believe that they can have a long-term career at Burberry as well. But we're also aware of what's happening outside. And we know that a lot of people, a lot of other companies, they're really investing in career development. And a lot of the opportunities out there are much more transparent than what they used to be. So other companies are evolving, and we're very much aware that we need to evolve as well. We've gone through quite a few restructures over the past few years. We're changing technology, expectations are changing, both from our clients and from our employees. And I think we need to really sit up and pay attention to those expectations, because people are telling us that they want to understand a bit more about how do they grow their career, how do they develop. They want to understand a bit more about how it works. So taking all of that information into hand, we need to make sure that we're meeting those demands. And both Wendy and Rosemary, they touched on the career development trends. So I'm not going to spend too much time talking about this, but just going back to the piece, Wendy, what you mentioned about the partnership. And that was one of the very early messages that we had, is really reinforcing the fact that career development is based on a solid partnership between the employee, line managers, and also Burberry as well. So we are moving away from that traditional view when it comes to career development. And I think one thing that you mentioned is it takes two to tango even, but really being able to push that message across and just making people aware that you do have a responsibility, you do need to be accountable, you do need to be proactive. And I think one of the things that you also mentioned earlier as well is really about that challenge of people expecting their line manager to deliver their career for them. And that's simply not the case. And I literally had a conversation with someone about this a couple of weeks ago, where they said, by the end of the year, I expect my manager to tell me what my next role is. So we're really trying to move away from that and encourage people to be a little bit more proactive. But then also thinking about the different kinds of roles that you can have. And that's been a bit of a challenge for us over the past few years as well, is really getting people to be quite creative when it comes to their career and start to think about growth-based opportunities as well as promotion-based opportunities, because a lot of people are seeing that vertical move upwards. So really thinking about that traditional career ladder. And we want to move away from that. We want to have that shift where we're encouraging people to be a bit more open about what kind of direction their career can go in. It can go in different directions. There's not one right way. It can take a variety of different shapes. So really being a bit more creative about that, seeing your career as being a career lattice rather than a career ladder. And just starting to think about what are some of my potential career moves that I could make. So whether you're taking on a broadening career move, and I think I'm a good example of that with my role, how it's expanded. So even though you're operating at the same level, you might be on more responsibility, but then also getting people to think about maybe stretch moves. So thinking about challenging themselves a little bit more, putting their hand up and stepping outside of the box and taking on some of those responsibilities as well. And I think 2020 has been a bit of a challenge for us as well, the way we've been working, particularly around learning. So moving towards more digital learning solutions has been a real key focus, which is going to tie in with the career development framework as well. So if we could move on to the next slide. So one thing I would like to do next is just to share with you, give you a little bit of a flavour around our career and development offering. So as I mentioned, we did receive a lot of feedback from our employees, our leaders, our line managers about what they wanted to really be able to enable them to start growing their career. So I wanted to give you a little bit of insight into what we've been working on over the past few years. And we've been working really closely with Rosemary and her team as well to really set some of these initiatives out. So just to start, we really wanted to make sure that we had guiding principles and responsibilities in place. And the purpose of the principles is really to define our approach, to have, I guess, a common goal when it comes to career development. but also, and just as important, just to make sure that we do have clear responsibilities for line managers, for employees, and also for us as a company as well. So that was something that was created right at the start of the process. And there's been a lot of, I guess, talk around talent management and how that factors into career development. And that's something that we have been working towards. We've been really refreshing some of our other key HR processes. So it's a really good opportunity to align our career approach with the broader talent approach as well. And I think one of the things that people do forget when they start thinking about talent management, and I think, Wendy, you mentioned this earlier, around career conversations. And it's so important to start with having a good career conversation, to a manager to really understand who's their top talent at the organisation and really get to know them, really understand what motivates them, understand their aspirations, and just make sure that those aspirations are aligned with the individual's needs as well as the organisational needs as well. But just also making sure that it's aligned to our performance management cycle. We've also been working on functional career paths and different models. And this has been really helpful, actually, because one thing that really came out of the engagement survey, one of the questions that was raised is, I don't know where to go in my career. I don't know what's next for me. I don't know what my next move is. So it's really being able to help them with that and just give them a little bit more visibility around career paths and looking at some of the possibilities that are available to them. But then also thinking about experience maps. So encouraging people to think about what are the experiences and exposure that people really need to be successful over the course of their career. We've also been looking at development planning as well. So we have updated our approach to development planning and really encouraging people to have a bit more clarity and focus around it and start thinking about their short-term goals, their mid-term goals, and their long-term goals, and understand how you can have a truly holistic approach when it comes to their development planning. So that's literally just been launched a few months ago. So really being able to help our employees with that. And we created an internal career site. So that's been around now for a couple of years. And once again, it goes back to the feedback that we had around, I don't know where to find anything about career development. It's not easily accessible to me. So being able to put all of the information around careers in one place, have a dedicated platform which has information about personal branding or career paths or networking, finding out about different opportunities. So that's been really great to be able to share that with employees. But one thing that we do always say is it's not an HR site, it is an employee site. So we do want the content to be driven by our employees as well. So if there's anything that they want to see, we do try to get that on board. And that's very similar with the learning and development SharePoint. One of the great tools that we have is around the strengths profile assessments. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that, but there's been a real focus on being able to leverage your strengths over the past few years as well. So we worked with a company who was able to provide us with this tool. And it really helps you understand a little bit more about what energizes you, what you enjoy doing, what you're good at, but also thinking about the strengths that you use in your day-to-day work life. But then also thinking about the strengths that maybe you don't use as much, but maybe you should, to really be able to maximize your potential. And that's really, it really makes the career conversations a little bit richer to be able to talk about those topics. And there's also a couple of other really great external resources that we use as well in terms of good practice and Get Abstract. One of the things that's made a real impact as well is career story profiles. And it's really interesting because many people have said over time that they don't believe that they can make particular moves because they haven't seen it done at Burberry. So we've been reaching out to different people across the organisation, across different regions, across different functions, at different levels of the organisation, and said, please share, because people don't believe it's possible. They don't believe that you could move from IT into finance, or you could move from retail into merchandising, for example. So we want to show that actually it is really possible. So we've been sharing career story profiles, videos and podcasts to really bring it to life. Also, one of the challenges that we face is around networking, and that's a really interesting one, because a lot of people say that they have a bit of a fear about reaching out to different people within the organisation, let alone reaching out to people externally. So it's really about providing, I guess, a bit of a framework and helping people to become a bit more confident with networking opportunities. And one of the really great initiatives it's been absolutely fantastic is working with Rosemary and her team on career coaching clinics, where people get one-to-one sessions with a career coach, someone who's external, to really be able to get that perspective, but also being able to be empowered to start to think for themselves and come up with their own solutions. And on top of that, we've also been, we've recently launched mentoring as well. And it's interesting because I've done mentoring in other organisations before, but it's quite a new concept at Burberry. And that's something that's really being able to pick up traction and encouraging people to get that objective view from somebody else. It was also mentioned a bit earlier about different workshops. So we have created a career development workshop for line managers, so really helping you to support your team members and have those really effective and consistent career coaching conversations. But we also have developed one for employees as well. And I think, Rosemary, one of the things that you had mentioned was about intentional career development. And that's one of the key themes around the career development programme, is to encourage people to be intentional and don't just sit back and wait for your
Joe, I'm sorry, Joe, we do need to move to the breakout sessions now, but thank you very much for your input so far. Is there anything you wanted to quickly wrap up with before we move on?
Yeah, if we could just move on to the next slide, and I'll just very quickly wrap that part up. So yeah, this was really just to summarise the journey around career development. I know I've mentioned that word journey many times, but I think one of the things I really wanted to be able to point out here is the impact that has been made. And I am pleased to say that there has been a positive impact. And we've seen that year on year with the engagement survey scores being able to increase. And I think now that we've got the tools and resources available for employees, they're really starting to map out their career, which is showing commitment as well. And just thinking about some of the successes as well that we've had is that a lot of people are starting to embrace lateral moves, which they never did before, really starting to think about some of the experiences. So just joining a project team or just doing a bit of job shadowing is really effective, thinking about the skills that can be developed from that. But I think it's also about having a change of attitude and just speaking to people who maybe a couple of years ago I had that conversation and they were quite negative, and just seeing how they've kind of evolved in their thought process. So I think that's been really great to be able to see as well.
That's great, Joe. I can see from the chat, and you'll be able to see when you get a minute to look, lots of really good questions and comments to come back to. Rosemary, are you going to send us off with our task? Thanks,
yes,
Joe.
Indeed. So what we want to do now is give you a chance to go into breakout rooms and to just think about what the inputs have stimulated, really. What's on top of your mind when you think about career development in organisations, and just have some sharing in your groups. You'll all have different perspectives on this, but just what's resonating with you right now as you think about this topic. I think we're going to come back for discussion. We need to kick off the next session by 6. So I guess, Michael, about 10 minutes in the breakout room.
Yes, about 10 minutes
Is what we've got enough time for, I think. So you need to get to it. So off you go. I think you'll be quickly allocated into a group very shortly. And thanks so much, Joe, for bringing that to life. I think it's so wonderful to hear. I'm talking about it theoretically in a way, looking at the model, but actually how you apply that model in practice, as you've done in Burberry, is really good. So thank you.
There was an interesting question from the previous session about perhaps a question for Joe, really. Where's Joe gone? She's still there.
Wendy, John has raised his hand.
Oh, John.
That's all right.
Go.
Just jumping in really quickly. We talked about what motivates the kind of excellent work that Joe has described. And some of us felt that it was things like engagement scores and retention issues. And interestingly, at this point, at the end of partway through the COVID crisis, skill shortages. An awful lot of organizations are not finding the people they're looking for, therefore want to upskill and develop their existing workforce as well.
Yes, and I have a feeling that one of the reasons I'm seeing more employers talking about careers right now is they can see a big upskilling, reskilling agenda to come, which is welcome because it puts that much wider perspective properly back on the agenda. Any other questions, comments? So many of you, I can only see half of you at a time, even in tiny.
Wendy,
Quite
can
a
I
lot
say
of
something?
comments in the chat.
Yeah,
Sorry,
I
do
think
go
I
ahead.
heard Rob's voice. Yeah, Rob.
Yeah, no, just reading one of the chat comments, and also in our group, and very much aware of the importance of career stories and about sharing those in the organisation, and how do we actually get those career stories to people in a way that they feel connected with the world outside of their immediate work, and it gives them the sense of hope and possibility. So I think the whole idea of career stories, I think, really resonates with people.
And Rosemary and Joe, there's a question from earlier that you might like to pick up about the difference between performance development and career conversations. Joe, what does Burberry do about those?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah, that's quite an interesting one, because a lot of people do tend to confuse performance management with career conversations, and we do say that there are similarities, there is some overlap there, but we do want to have that distinction. And I think when it comes to having those conversations and we think about performance, it is about performing your day-to-day work, so thinking about your performance objectives, what you need to achieve as part of your role. But a lot of people do like to, as well, in that conversation, then merge it a little bit with career conversations, and we always say try and have those conversations separately. So have a performance conversation about your day-to-day role, what you need to achieve, any KPIs that you need to achieve, but then have the development conversation separately. So that's really where you're thinking about the development, which will help to enhance your performance. So you can see that link there, but just make sure that the development objectives and your performance objectives are different. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think just to build on that, Rosemary here, I think it's about the roles again, isn't it? As you said, it's really being clear about who's there to do at what stage. And what I find with other organisations, we do a lot of in the manager resources, really try and spell it out. You know, what's the difference between performance conversation, what's the difference between career conversation? How do you prepare for it in different ways? What outcomes are you looking for? They're different. So just to build on that.
Thanks, Rosemary. I suppose one of the things I do worry about are people who can't easily talk to their line manager. And in my research, I've found that it isn't usually because people don't like their line manager. It's often because they don't want to rock the boat with their line manager, or their line manager knows very little more about careers in the organisation than they do. So one of the areas that Rob has done a lot of work on at CCS is thinking about a broader capability for supporting careers in an organisation, not only the boss, but sort of wider ranges of people. So I'm going to pass now over to Rob Nason and Gilly Freedman from CCS. Rob has been at this game for a very long time. I think CCS is 40 years old. So he's been around the block loads of times. Gilly too, very experienced career coach with a particular interest in women's careers. So Rob and Gilly, over to you.
Thank you, Wendy. Yeah, I must have been 2 years old when I started this, because 40 years ago, started very young. So welcome everybody, delighted to be here. We're going to go into some depth in one particular case of our experience, but it's a very it's significant, because I think, and Wendy knows about this, that we have been working with this particular organisation for the best part of 11 years. So Gilly and I are going to talk a little bit about the wider context. It's very much a shared presentation. What's the wider context that actually may influence the need for career support? I'm going to mention a little bit about our experience of supporting a variety of organisations in developing that extra person, if you like, whoever that might be, to provide career support. We're going to talk about the case study of Saint-Gobain, and unfortunately our colleague in Saint-Gobain was not able to join us today, but she participated in a short interview which I'm going to show you a little bit later on, and then we'll finish with some questions for you to reflect on. rather than answers. So that's a little bit about what we're going to do. I'll hand over to Gilly, who's going to talk you through a little bit about the wider context now. Gilly.
Yes, thank you, Rob. So I think quite a lot has been said about some of the factors that impact on organisations thinking about career support. But you know what factors that we've observed with our experience is we're seeing flatter structures. Now, I mean, certainly in larger organisations that's happening, and also across sectors. And because of this, I mean, there is less opportunity for promotion, as I think Joe mentioned. And so really the focus on career development in other ways than, you know, moving up the hierarchy become more important. I mean, you know, sometimes it's a way of supporting people through career transition, which, you know, could be impacting redeployment or redundancy through downsizing. But, you know, it is also seen as a very positive career development intervention, as Joe again has mentioned. And we do see, you know, as Wendy was saying, from career attitude surveys, quite a lot of disgruntlement about how careers have been managed, and that again is sort of a push to provide career support in the organisations that we've worked with. And from the organisational perspective, I think it's been mentioned, you know, it's this need to retain and engage valued staff. It's really important. Career support can help to do this, you know, by career coaches that we've trained, really investing time to kind of hear and acknowledge individuals. I mean, we hear so often that individuals don't feel valued, they don't, you know, feel cared about. And I think that's, you know, it's quite symbolic to actually provide that level of career support where conversations take place. And people can be encouraged to kind of think through, there are choices, there are options, there are possibilities, and also to be encouraged to be proactive and take responsibility. I mean, there's a huge impetus, I think, for individuals to take responsibility for their careers now, but equally for organizations to offer resources and support. So it should ideally be a kind of marriage between the two. And I think, you know, organizations who shunt individuals off by saying, well, you're responsible for your own career is not helpful. But equally, you know, if organizations provide resources, a really happy marriage can take place, as we've seen in Burberry. And then finally, the sort of post-COVID emphasis that we're all noticing, I think, in terms of sort of better well-being, and this really ties in with support and career support, so that the individual is being cared about. They're not just a number in the organisation. So I'm going to pass over to Rob now, who will just talk a bit about some of the organisations we've worked with and some of the different approaches.
And I guess the emphasis on well-being is actually predominant in quite a lot of these organisations we've worked with. From the BBC many years ago, CareerLink and CareerLink Plus offering support, both one-to-one support by trained coaches. We trained about 50 coaches there, and fortunately got a National Training Award for that. And that was coupled with workshops. INSEAD, careers advisors working with MBAs, Oxfordshire County Council, we recruited and selected a number of internal volunteers to provide career support, and that is still going on to this day since 2009. CERN, we've been training individual line managers and their staff in teams to both give and receive career conversations using our new balanced career management toolkit and questionnaire. We're currently also working with Schroders, the wealth management people, to train internal volunteer mentors to offer career coaching for people in different parts of the organisation. We've just finished running a series of what we call Webby shops at the UNDP, not webinars or workshops, but Webby shops, for 200 women globally to develop confidence in career management skills. And Gilly and I worked for 6 years with the FAO in Rome, supporting the development of internal career workshops. So quite a wide sort of background. We haven't got time to address those today, of course, but we have chosen to focus on Saint-Gobain, who we've worked with for the best part of 10 years, I think I would say. And when we came in to them originally in 2009, they wanted to encourage mobility within the organization. Sangomar is a company which is huge, nearly 200,000 people worldwide, in 66 countries. They had grown hugely at that time by acquisition, and they had incorporated a number of very different business cultures, none of which was interrelating. People were not moving between them, and they wanted to encourage that mobility both nationally and internationally. They wanted to encourage, to enable better vision of the options that were available. They clearly wanted to, as we've heard already, engage and retain high-performing staff. They were also very much driven by the diversity and inclusion agenda. They wanted to help people to prepare for advancement, and therefore career support was seen as very much as a positive intervention to enable people to manage and develop their careers themselves, but with the support of a trained career coach and also the resources provided by the organisation. So they wanted to collaborate with an external partner to enable what they described as professional career coaching. So Gilly.
Yeah, so before I talk about what we actually did at Sangomar, I just wanted to share this quote from the HR director, Richard Batley. So career coaching fits with our wider ethos of coaching, helping people to find the answers for themselves, as opposed to being told what they are going to do. And I think, you know, this demonstrates how helpful it can be when we are implementing career support into an organization. You know, if it can be tied in with an already established culture of coaching where people are already encouraged to find out for themselves and ask questions rather than expecting to be told. So we were brought in at the start to collaborate with a senior HR steering group on setting up career coaching. So we were very lucky because we were there right at the start to discuss what their needs were, what it could look like, and we collaborated with them on this. I think what also gave great credibility to this major project was endorsement from the French senior vice president, who actually came over from Paris and gave a speech in London endorsing career coaching as being very important to the progress of the organization and encouraging managers to be involved and the outputs of the career coaching to be taken back to the managers. So there was a kind of, whilst the process was confidential, the outputs would be taken back to the manager, and there was a sort of continuity to it. What the organization and coaches really appreciated as well was not only 5 days of training in terms of our methodology, our tools, and you know, some very useful interpersonal skills in terms of having conversations, but they really appreciated being accredited. I think this gave it the sort of professionalism and credibility that they sought, and that was in two ways. Firstly, they got a license from us to use our methodology, to use 40 of our tools, but also they were encouraged to attend the Masters in Career Coaching at Kingston University that we had jointly set up. So I think that gave great credence to the whole project. And finally, what we also set up, which I think helped enormously, was we recommended that there should be a gatekeeper, a sort of focal person with career coaching experience who would allocate the coaches to the coaches based on three things really. The fact that the coaches had to be outside the coaches' business area, so there wasn't any sort of contamination there, there was a neutrality. Secondly, to some extent level, so very senior, working with perhaps more senior HR, although that was not strict. And then thirdly, diary availability. And we found that really helped the process to roll out so smoothly. So from being available only to top talent, and we've talked quite a lot about diversity today, it worked so well. And you know, because of the focus on diversity, it was rolled out to the whole organization. And then a few additional things that we did that really sort of helped it to back up the provision and make it successful were and we still are, provided CPD days, which consisted of the case management discussion for the career coaches, and in the morning a career related topic was always presented. So there was a really good ongoing involvement between us and the career coaches, which kept up their motivation. We also implemented one-day line management training courses for having career conversations. And I mean, it was quite revelatory, I think, for some of these line managers to realize that they didn't have to solve the problem of career. They didn't have to find the answers for their people they manage, but actually they could do a lot of very valuable stuff by having an open conversation, enabling their coachees to think about options and choices, and then together to set an action plan. And I think, as somebody said, the separation between performance appraisal and career discussions does work much better if possible. But this was quite a revelation to the line managers. And then finally, we introduced our balance questionnaire, as that Rob mentioned, with 29 tools, which indeed helps people who are not making changes, particularly in their role, but really want to manage far more effectively. And we encourage the career coaches and help them to set up a data bank of resources.
Yeah, thank you, Gilly. And yes, the balance program, which we can talk to you later about if you want, is very much about looking after yourself and looking after the needs of your employer. I noticed that when Rosemary was talking, it was really lovely to see the stuff about networking, building relationships, personal branding, and that sort of thing. We very much will endorse that. And together with the need, I think, for people to focus on their energy, the use of their own energy, understanding how they can best use their own personal resources, as well as fit to meet the resources of their employer.
Rob,
yeah.
There's a brief question of clarification that I think might be useful to answer as to whether the career coaches were also line managers or whether they were different people, whether some did both roles.
Well, correct. Inevitably, a human resource director has a team, and therefore they did have line management responsibility, but they weren't part of the line manager group who was trained. They were a self-selected group of people working at the top of the different businesses throughout the UK and Northern Ireland, who wanted to get trained. So they were also line managers, but they weren't categorized as line managers for the training.
Thank you.
Just to reinforce what Gilly was saying about the French managing director who came over from Paris, I always remember his comment was to everybody, make sure this doesn't just become another HR process, that this has got to be part of and embedded into the organization as part of our operational strategy. And that was a lovely, lovely endorsement. And I think the fact that we have 23 career coaches trained who are still operating today, even though I think we've trained more than 30 over the years. Not a huge number of people supported, over 300 people. I think often organisations, when they're thinking about bringing this in, get scared that they're going to be overrun, overwhelmed with people, and they rarely are. Coachees are nominated, or they can self-nominate, and as Gilly said, the conversations are completely confidential. However, the outcome of the conversation has to be fed back to the line. That is the condition of the career coaching. In fact, in the statement of rights and responsibilities for the coach and the coachee, it's stated quite clearly that it's confidential, but the outcome has to be fed back, but it's completely controlled by the client, not by the coach. So they can say what they like in a way. And I think the time and space to explore their interests and options inside and outside. So it's much broader, much more holistic than simply career development, career performance and career management. That's obviously part of it. But I think, as we all know, when we offer coaching or counselling or mentoring or guidance or advice or consultation, you start somewhere, and if you build up trust and you listen well, people will open up and start talking to you about a wide variety of activities. Before I show you the video, just a little bit about some of the feedback we got. This was from a survey taken a few years ago, I will say that, but 81% tell us that career coaching has had a positive impact on their commitment and engagement with the company, with 74% saying that career coaching has affected their decision to stay. 66% believe that career coaching has opened their eyes to opportunities to further develop their career within the organisation, so link back to some of the points made earlier on. And 32% have had at least one positive career move. There's no distinction of whether that's lateral or not. And the opportunity, and I think we talked about this in our small group earlier, to talk to someone in a neutral position who could challenge preconceptions, doubts and assumptions. It was useful to have a coach, somebody who could understand my desire to have a work-life balance with a young family, being a coach to commit to some next steps. So just a few examples. I'm going to share with you now a short video, an interview I made with the person who's currently the career coach lead in the organization. So just sit back and enjoy this video for a few minutes. Hi Kerry, it's really good of you to give up your valuable time to talk to us today about the Sangaman Career Coaching Service. Thanks very much.
You're very welcome.
So we were talking about this service, which has been around since 2012, which is quite a long time ago. And I'm thinking about well, what makes the service valuable to the company today?
I think it's a combination of things, really, Rob. In terms of impact, one of the key aims of the career coaching was to help mobility and the migration of talent across our different businesses within the UK of Ireland. So we have seen a lot of impact around that. You know, we've had around 10 times more people move across businesses and out of sectors than we did previously when we didn't have our career coaching. And we've also seen an increase in some of our employee satisfaction scores, particularly around the areas of, you know, do people understand their career options? Do they feel value in? Do they get to talk to people about their careers? So those numbers are going up. So in answer to your question, you know, there's a couple of things there.
Yeah, brilliant. And I guess the bottom line for a commercial organisation is return on investment, is, you know, value for money, so to speak. So what is the kind of what's the argument that we can put, if you like, around ROI? What is it that makes this so valuable to the organisation even today?
Well, I think if you know, taking the other couple of things into account, absolutely, they're perhaps softer measures. But I guess if you look at, it's really about retaining talent within businesses. If you look at how much it can cost you to recruit, settle people in, if you're keeping that talent in and spreading it costs, you know, you reduce on things like recruitment costs, retraining costs. You know, people are motivated, people's capability increases. You know, we can get side things out of it, like people become mentors and they become coaches themselves. So the return on investment, you know, if you're an accountant, you can't put it down to exact numbers, but if you think about it in that broad sense, that there's real value in this type of program.
Right, thank you for that. And then just thinking from the individual's perspective, what do people actually say that they value about it? What do the individuals say they get from it?
I think when I look at the evaluations that come back from people who have been career coached, one of the things that strikes me is that investment in them, in terms of somebody sitting down and really listening to them and hearing their ambitions, their hopes, etc. There's value people identify in how much their self-awareness is raised and the work around the values and the motivators, how some people have never really thought about that before, and it kind of speaks to them in terms of that, you know, what's going on for them. There's the opening up, I guess, of broader horizons for them. So if we have somebody in one of our businesses that's huge, for instance, you know, people quite often get stuck into, I can only work in this business, in this role. And what they value about the career coaching is it's less about, they don't look at job descriptions anymore. They look at activities and possibilities. So it really expands their thoughts in terms of what they could do and could be capable of. So it's that real broadening of the world of work for them in its widest sense.
Okay, that's absolutely brilliant. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much, Kerry. That's really helpful.
You're very welcome.
There we go. Gilly.
Yeah, so, you know, looking at the sort of outcomes and the bigger picture, and I think it's just really heartening for us that career coaching is still in place after 10 years. You know, that is, well, that is a real marker of its continuing success. Yeah, and you know, more coaches are being trained. We're continuing to run our CPD days with case management discussion. And I particularly like that last point that Kerry made, which is that you know, employees are looking beyond the job description. They're actually looking for activities and opportunities that will develop them in different ways. And I think it echoes very much Joe's point actually in Burberry about the sort of encouraging a growth mindset. You know, it's the idea of the lattice rather than the ladder career, because actually, you know, the ladder career is really not possible in many organizations now. And so it's almost an imperative, but there's also something very encouraging, I think, about this growth mindset and helping employees develop, you know, new learnings, new experiences. And of course, it makes them more marketable in the, you know, medium and longer term as well. And just finally, sort of thinking more sort of granularly a bit the impact on people. Coaches have told us all the way through the training that you know, it really enhances their skills, and certainly with the majority of people we've trained have been middle or senior HR, and they find that they're using these skills in different contexts, not just in having career conversations. So for them, it's a very enhancing experience. But also in Saint-Gobain, they had the opportunity to meet people in different parts of the organization, and that sort of fed into a deeper and broader understanding of, you know, where their opportunities lay in these different amalgamated businesses. So it was a benefit to the coaches in order to plan for coachees. Yeah, and what's noticeable is that making changes some coachees commit to, but others just feel more engaged in their current roles and have more of a sense of purpose for the longer term. So it's not, you know, this is not just about career transition and change. And very often, you know, we found in our experience that people do recommit, they do re-engage, they do have more motivation for what they're doing, as well as looking at possibilities and opportunities. And, you know, people are, from our experience and research, less likely to leave organizations for some of the reasons that Wendy mentioned, but also I think largely because they feel invested in and cared for by the organization. And, you know, they see that there are opportunities and possibilities to develop. Because generally, I think people shy away from change, big change, if they can possibly avoid it.
I link back to Wendy's research with Wellcome Foundation many years ago, where we introduced some career workshops, and I think that the results were that people who went on the workshops were less likely to leave the organisation.
Actually, that's not true. That it's retention neutral. So some who would have left stayed, and some who would have stayed left.
Okay.
But both ways round. But I think. I think we should move to questions fairly soon. Are you fairly ready, Rob?
Yeah, I've just about got one final slide, which actually poses a few questions, really, which is from our experience. Who actually owns the career, and how is the career defined within that organisation? It's certainly not one size fits all, and we can't provide, you know, the kind of rollout of activities. I think it's very important that we align our activities with the culture of the organisation, and also with the HR and business goals. So with the UNDP, where we've been working most recently, there's a People 2030 strategy with some very clear deliverables that have been outlined. So it's really important, I think, to bear that in mind. Who is most likely to drive sustainability? Well, you could say it's important to have the support of senior management, and indeed wherever we've worked, we've formed long-term partnerships with the most senior people, but also the practitioners, the people we've trained. They become enthusiastic advocates of this work and actually spread the word. And I think there's a sort of cultural change, a cascading down, which I think is so helpful to sustainability. In terms of the career, the key deliverables, well, you need to have good evaluation in place, and we would always ask at the beginning what the desired outcomes are going to be. The methods, a combination of one-to-one support, and that could be via line managers, via dedicated career coaches, by internal, by external support. We've run what we call Webby Shops, which are Zoom-based workshops for people, and I think that can be a lovely way to connect people, particularly in large global or even national organisations. And the resources are so important. The LMS portal, learning management system, plus any workshops. I know Sengama introduced a workshop for graduates called Explore, which is a 2-day workshop to encourage them to think more broadly about opportunities. Who delivers and how? Well, this links back to who owns career as well. We don't believe it's just the individual. It needs to be a collaboration between the individual and the organisation. So yes, there is a responsibility we have to look after ourselves, and part of that is managing our own careers, managing our own well-being. But we need to do that with the support of others around, and I think enlightened and responsible employers can do that. Trained coaches, line managers, external and internal resources. And last but not least is how do we minimise bias? And I think there's something around, as Gilly was referring to earlier on, who do you choose to offer the career support? Is it always going to be a line manager? No, it's not. Is it going to be the individual themselves, the most biased person of all? Is it going to be HR? Is it going to be external career coaches? Or as we're doing right now with Schroders, having mentor volunteers from different parts of the organisation who will definitely not be seeing people from their own particular part of the organisation. So I'd like to end there. No, we're coming up to 6:30, but not very much time for questions, but it's been a delight to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rob and Gilly. Great session. And that last slide, I think, was a really good summary. We said we'd end at 6:30, so as and when you need to depart, do. Our speakers kindly said that they would stay online for a bit longer. So why don't we open up the questions now, but do feel free to leave the meeting when you choose. So I'll say my formal thank yous now. Thanks everyone. Thanks for coming. Thanks to our terrific speakers, to Rosemary and Joe and Rob and Gilly. I hope we've given you some little glimpse of when people say they work with organizations, you know, why it's not something you can just get done in 5 minutes. You know, it is really exciting and very challenging work to find that sweet spot, those win-win options. And as you've seen from both Rosemary's input and Rob's, there are many different ways of approaching this. There's not just one solution. So there's a lot of scope for creativity, but let's throw it open. If you could either raise your hand in your picture or preferably in your participant panel, raise your hand. I'll do my best, but there's a lot of people. So Rosemary's going to help me keep an eye on questions. And if you don't get noticed, just unmute yourself. Do we have a brave soul? If not, I shall pick on someone.
Well, this is not a question, but I would like, if she hasn't already done so, to congratulate Laura Walker on the publication of her book. And also, I'd like to invite you, Laura, to put the name of that book in the chat.
There you go, free advertising.
Thank you, Rob. Fortunately, it's relevant for today's topic, so I will put it in there.
I was watching the chat and there was a lot of debate about upward careers versus lateral careers. It's very easy for companies to say they want people to move sideways because that's very helpful. I would also add to the chat that actually it's not true that there's less promotion than there used to be, nor are organisations flatter. I think they look like the Matterhorn. We've never had such a big gap between the people at the tops of organisations and the people at the bottoms. So this idea that the world has become lateral, not true, actually. But I think that issue, maybe anyone or one of the speakers would like to address this issue of how do we cater for both the people who want to move sideways, to have a varied career, and the people who kind of want to get on in more conventional terms? John, have you got thoughts on this you'd like to offer? Because you've done a lot of work with lateral movement, I know.
Well, I think, first of all, I'd echo one or two of the comments to say it's great to hear about career development in organisations, and I think we should probably do more of it within NICEC, because there's a real richness of provision here that we've heard about this evening. In terms of lateral moves, what's really interesting about it, I think, is that there's all kinds of mindset problems which are exactly the same, I think, as for people that are trying to navigate their way through the job market, in terms of how to talk to other people inside the organization and whether it's appropriate to be visible, to be asking questions, to be making internal connections. And I certainly once heard one of our leading banks talk about this behavior in a very nuanced way. One of the senior leaders saying, it's something we have to coach people in. It's something you have to teach. It's about finding the right balance between pushing yourself forward, perhaps too energetically, and hiding, which is entirely non-productive.
Yeah, can I just follow that one up, actually? Yes, completely agree. And I think also there are those organizations which have said, it's your responsibility to manage your career now, and not really provided the support to do that. Just develop yourself laterally and talk to your manager about it. And yes, go on these courses to power and impact and all that stuff and personal branding. But actually, if they knock on the door of their manager and the manager says, hey, you're not leaving, I need you. Plus also other people in other parts of the organization are not really open to receiving new, development projects, work shadowing or whatever. It becomes structurally much more difficult. So you need to operate, I think, at a systemic level, at a cultural level, almost an OD level, rather than one which is like focused, on a tiny part of the organization and the philosophy, which is like, let's get everyone taking responsibility for their careers.
I think that's right. I don't think you can overestimate the impact of a job process where you are bound to always select the person who is the best fit on that day for that job. That's a kind of anti-development labour market we have. We have it externally and internally. And when we have people we regard as precious, we give them a lot of developmental opportunities. They're allowed to do jobs they've never done before. But Rob, your point about the sort of cultural barriers to sideways movement, it's partly in the mind of the individual, but it's also in the culture of the organisation. And the response you often get, I remember talking to a young woman in retail who wanted to move from sales into marketing. And they said, why do you want to do that? You work in sales.
Yeah.
And so how we open up that is very difficult.
How I think we can open that is by taking an holistic approach, recognizing we are people. We're not just workers or representatives of the different careers. And this is where the well-being agenda is so important. And I think when we're training people, to be alert to that as well, that they need to recognize that the individual has a life outside of work. And I know that post-COVID, and people are saying, I miss the so-called water cooler chat and so on, that people are actually starting to have informal meetings where they can bring their dog and their children and their families into the meeting as well. So recognizing we are whole people and not just workers or representatives of a particular career, I think that's so important.
Wendy, can I just come in on that point about, we've just been talking about how to make this happen. I do absolutely, you'd probably expect me to say it actually has to be really intentional at this and the structural level to make managers rewarded for moving people about. But the thing I observe, which is a slightly different topic, is that people in mid-career, and Laura would come in, is people do get a bit stuck. So a lot of the people that come on our programs, they've been in the same role for a while, or they've lost their confidence about how to make a move or how to do something different. They're useless at applying for jobs internally. They get turned back because they haven't put any thought into it. So I think there is something there about unlocking people as well, so that they are able to step forward and step out of their comfort zone a bit, because actually they probably would enjoy it if they just got out of that rut. So that's what I see happening as well, and you could do quite a lot to help people in those situations, so they embrace the potential of moving around or changing their role.
Yes,
I'm sure that
if I can just
goes a long way.
If I can just add to that,
Gilly and then Laura.
Sorry, but I mean, it goes back to career stories that we've been talking about, but also role models are incredibly powerful. You know, so seeing people in organizations that have made those transitional moves and publicizing that, and Saint-Gobain was very good at that. They produced a whole series of videos, a day in the life of, and included in that were people who'd made, you know, big transitions and change roles. And I think that's incredibly important, particularly for the population you're talking about, Rosemary, who feel kind of stuck and that it's not possible and talk themselves out of it. To see role models and to see it actually does happen and can happen, and I'm a bit like them, and so why can't I do it? I think it's really powerful.
Yeah,
and I think Laura wanted to come in.
Yeah, so I think the stuckness is an issue, and seeing other people and hearing other people's stories does help. So, you know, I did some research on this, which went into the Bill Law Award, and that's the basis of my book. So it's how to help people who are stuck or unsure in midlife, and help them to do that pause and thinking for themselves, to start them thinking a bit differently about, and help unlock, as Rosemary said, you know, what the potential is that they could do. Interestingly, career stories have only a partial effect. So it doesn't help them to do anything. So it doesn't help them work out what they want or work out how they can go about it. It just gives them a bit confidence that they're not weird. So it's okay to want something else. And then when they get over that, and they need to do a lot more work around discovering who they are now, what really matters to them, they have to think about their context a lot more than people do earlier in their career. There's a lot more going on. So this notion of contextual readiness is really important in midlife, because they've got less potential for some things, more potential for other things. There's this multi-directionality going on, which makes things quite complex. But yeah, I think all of the things that we've talked about help, but we need to do something really practical. And all the stuff that was around a few years ago on the midlife career review, it's really simple. You know, the opportunity to take stock and legitimize the possibility of doing something different for the final chapters or chapter of our working lives.
I do
really
agree. And in the very recent big survey that the Corporate Research Forum has kindly shared with me before they publish it later this week, one of the really interesting and somewhat disappointing findings is how few employers, this was over 100 large employers, very diverse sectors, they're not on the whole offering age-related or any of those interventions. Aviva still are, it's still on their website. So it's interesting that only the insurance companies who have this very long-term business to think about.
Yeah,
because,
they
again,
still are.
I do agree, Laura, there are lots of interventions that are very doable. And workshops are one of the most doable, because they just, you know, people are used to delivering workshops. It fits in L&D. You can sign yourself up. It's no big deal. It's why the work career innovation have done with workshops, I think, is so useful. But yet employers, interestingly, in that survey, career workshops generally were on the map. They weren't unknown, but they were not offered nearly as often as you would think would be cost effective, because they're also really cheap, given that people don't need this every year.
Yeah.
You know, I did a sum after the wonderful work on the mid-career review. I reckon it costs about £7 a year to make career workshops available to staff.
Yeah,
because they don't need them very often. They're not very expensive to run. If you're using modern technology, they're even cheaper to run. They have greater reach. So why, you know, I just think employers, it's not kind of on their hit list of things to do.
It's not. They're distracted by other things. And I think the other thing about the career review, it's difficult, is to know who. And I think you're right about the L&D function. You know, it's easier to run workshops, but I find it even having worked in lots of big corporate organizations, it's very difficult to know, do you talk to well-being? Do you talk to pensions and financial planning? Do you talk to L&D? And having, you know, it's quite difficult to get it on the agenda. It needs to, you know, we need to work very hard to get in the right place.
And I think it's why the messages both from Rob and Rosemary and Joe about, you know, how you get this stuff systemic it does have to.
I think that's important.
Just
want to add, I'm going to have to go in a second, but I just want to add, really reinforce the word embed, if you like, is key. And certainly, you know, all the organisations I mentioned tonight, and particularly Saint-Gobain, they've all introduced multifaceted approaches to this work. It's not been an intervention which is like a one-off, a dream child of some HR person who then leaves the organisation, the whole thing flops. It's a mixture of workshops, one-to-one, internal training, external support, resources, better resources, webinars. You know, it's a whole range of things. And I think that's the answer to why I think some of these organisations we've mentioned tonight are continuing 10, 12 years later to offer this in different ways and in responding to different situations. You know, since 2008, the world has become a completely different place. But I think that's my message to everybody, is it needs to be multifaceted and systemic. Yeah.
I think that's a really good place to end our seminar.
Okay, well, thank you guys. That was really interesting, and it was so nice to have.
Thank you, Wendy, for your inimitable chairmanship as well.
Yes, thank you, Wendy. Yes.
Thanks for coming, guys. We'll save the recording, we'll save the chat. I hope it's put a lot of you in touch with each other, and do keep in touch with NICEC. Great to see you all.
Really stimulating.
And special thanks to all our guest speakers, and Joe, to you. It was absolutely great. Thanks, everyone. I'll say good night.
Good night.
Bye. Bye. Bye.